Good afternoon. It's Monday, August 8th, and you're watching The Daily Beat here on i24 News. I'm Michal Divon. Let's get to today's headlines. The Israeli government sets up a task force to deport activists it deems are working against the state of Israel. Japan's Emperor Akihito makes a rare address hinting at intentions to resign. And day 2 of Rio, a new swimming record is made as Phelps wins his 19th Olympic gold medal. And a surprise in tennis as the #1 seed goes home in the first round. Welcome to the Daily Beat. We're going to start with the latest from Israel and the West Bank. Israel's government no longer opposes cutting off power to Palestinian cities in the West Bank over a large debt, a reversal of its previous stance. Responding to a Palestinian High Court of Justice petition against the practice, Israel noted that while it has the authority to instruct its electric corporation to continue supplying Palestinian cities, it will no longer do so. And in studio is Shai Ben-Ari, our senior defense correspondent. Shai, why is Israel reversing its stance?
Well, really, this is a situation where you have a very large debt, around $500 million owed by the Palestinian Authority to the Israeli Electric Company, which basically has always given that specific infrastructure to the territories controlled by the authority. This is an exercise of pressure, you could say. This debt has been long-standing. The government now apparently no longer opposes the cutting off of power to the PA as a measure of pressure. The report also states that the government has already told the High Court it will no longer instruct the electric company to provide electricity. Back in May and April, there were cases of blackouts in Bethlehem and Jericho when the electric company actually cut down a measure of the power as a form of exercising pressure. The court then put an injunction on this, blocked the continuation of that measure until the government could come to sort of decision over whether it felt that was necessary. Because we are talking about a matter that does relate to Israeli national security. We're talking about the Israeli generals have come out and said that the livelihood, that the well-being of the population in the West Bank specifically has a determined effect on the state of security in Israel and the West Bank and so forth. So there's a general Israeli interest in having life in the West Bank be more or less comfortable.
And can we expect the High Court of Justice once again interfering and forcing the Israeli government to continue supplying electricity?
I'm not sure. What we are now expecting is some sort of hearing, and from what we understand, basically the court was waiting for the government's response to really come to the conclusion if this measure was justified in terms of national security. And according to this report on Army Radio, the government has now come to the conclusion that this measure is perhaps legitimate. Perhaps we'll see a certain escalation where the measure will be brought back into force, perhaps increased. I don't know if we'll actually see a cutting off in general of electricity to the PA, but they want to reach some sort of solution here in terms of the debt owed as well.
And what kind of reaction are we seeing from the Palestinian side?
Obviously, this is being denounced and has been denounced in the past when it was used back in May and April. Obviously, they aren't happy over it, but it is an ongoing situation where the PA, of course, owes money. There are a lot of concerns over corruption in the PA. This is an organization that does receive a lot of funds from European nations. The Israelis say there's no reason you shouldn't be able to pay this debt that is owed. So we're talking about a very controversial subject.
Thanks, Shai. You are staying with us. The Israeli government is clamping down on activists, which it says works against the state of Israel. A new Israeli task force will work to deport activists calling to boycott Israel and prevent others from entering. Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan and Interior Minister Aryeh Deri announced this on Sunday. More from Maya Margit.
A major blow for anti-Israel activists? 2 top Israeli government ministers have announced they will set up a task force to deport activists calling for a boycott of the Jewish state. Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan and Interior Minister Aryeh Deri said the team would track down hundreds of boycott, divestment and sanctions activists and prevent others from entering the country.
This is a necessary step in light of the malicious intentions of delegitimization activists working to spread lies and distort the reality in our region.
The task force's primary goal will be to gather intelligence and collect evidence, allowing the government to find foreign activists who are in Israel. Erdan and Deri also accused BDS organizations of fomenting violence in the West Bank and obstructing soldiers and border police. According to the ministers, there are dozens of groups in Israel collecting information and using it to further boycotts. Hundreds of foreign activists have reportedly entered the country through Ben Gurion International Airport. While some officially belong to BDS groups, others do not.
We have the responsibility to do all we can to crush the boycott and state clearly that we will not allow Israel to be harmed. The boycott of Israel must carry a price.
But in a bid to allay fears, Erdan and Derry noted that Israel would not be carrying out mass deportations of human rights activists. Instead, they said their efforts would target only foreign nationals who are actively promoting the BDS movement or provoking riots in the West Bank.
Shai, critics of Israel will say that this could, of the Israeli stance, could say that this will isolate the state, targeting these activists. Yet the BDS movement is something that the Israeli government has put high on its agenda.
Right. I agree with the idea that this could perhaps backfire. We're talking about, it's important to remember, this is a battle of public relations, essentially. And these two Israeli ministers have made much of their new initiative. But there's a question over whether this could backfire from the Israeli perspective. BDS activists generally create most of their publicity, not here in Israel, but in other countries on college campuses, mainly. Their activity here, and then they do come here to the West Bank and to Israel, but their activity here doesn't actually generate a lot of headlines. What could generate a lot of headlines is if we see suddenly police raids targeting these individuals, arresting them. The scenes will typically be filmed because that is the whole idea of activism, to sort of publicize these kinds of activities. And the question is, would that actually harm or further Israel's interests? I don't think you need to tell me. I need to tell you exactly what it would do.
And what kind of international pressure can we expect against this?
Right. If that were indeed to happen, I would expect that the international pressure would be forthcoming, because no one likes to see that kind of thing, not in Israel and not abroad. It wouldn't look good for Israel to start arresting all sorts of European and North American youths, college kids coming over who perhaps have a certain illegitimate criticism of Israel from the Israeli perspective. But the question is if this kind of initiative will actually help the Israeli interest. I'm not sure at all. And
it could very well backfire. Now, another subject of arrests, but a different kind. The IDF having arrests throughout the West Bank taking place now on a regular basis, almost every night. We know that this past night another raid was made. Is there an intensified effort by Israel? I wouldn't say it's an intensified effort. It's an ongoing effort. Overnight, there were 14 arrests, 11 of them having to do with what it's called really popular uprisings, popular demonstrations or rioting, targeting the Israeli security forces. Which of people kind of makes me wonder about the other 3, because only 11 of them are suspected of having terror links.
Right. 3 of them were actually Hamas members. This is a typical sort of pattern that we see. Some of the arrests conducted each night tend to be members of established terror networks. Some of them fit the profile of the current terror wave, which really more typically would be unaffiliated youths, even around the age of 17, 18, perhaps even younger, who just take it upon themselves to take up arms or throw rocks at Israeli forces. A lot of this activity is preceded by sort of social media monitoring these days, where Israeli forces have actually come to the conclusion that they have to monitor activity on Facebook, for example, that gives them a few clues as to who is planning on carrying out attacks. This can lead to the typical arrests that we see every night, but it's an ongoing effort, and it's part of the reason that we've seen an overall reduction of violence since around March or April, but it's certainly not over yet. We're seeing every few weeks a more or less a pretty serious attack even, and there are still minor incidents as well. And something we can expect to continue hearing about. Shai Ben-Ari, thank you for weighing in as we move along. In the greatest sign of support yet, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan telling a crowd of at least 1 million in Istanbul he would approve the death penalty if backed by parliament and the public. The rally follows last month's failed military coup. i24 News' Anna Ehrenheim with the latest from Turkey.
It was the largest rally in modern Turkish history. Istanbul was bathed in red as millions of people from across the country turned out for the Democracy and Martyrs rally, the climax of 3 weeks of nightly demonstrations by the supporters of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan around the country.
We are not here today for our leader. We are here to protect our country. We will not leave our country in the hands of 4 thugs. Today we are not here for our leaders, but the country.
The head of Turkey's armed forces, Hulusi Akar, also made a rare address to a public rally, thanking civilians for their role in taking to the streets and confronting the troops, stopping the coup in its tracks.
The traitors who inflicted this disgrace on the Turkish Republic, the Turkish people and the Turkish armed forces, who have a glorious past, will be punished in the harshest way. Nobody should doubt that.
But despite the harsh words for coup supporters, the overall atmosphere of the rally was that of national unity. The failed coup was the biggest threat to Erdogan's 13 years in power and killed more than 270 people. The ensuing crackdown has seen tens of thousands of public sector workers suspended or dismissed. Another 18,000 people have been detained or arrested.
And journalist Laura Patel joins us now from Istanbul. Laura, thanks for being with us this afternoon. An unbelievable attendance yesterday. Is there no more opposition in Turkey?
Is there no more opposition in Turkey? Well, I think we're seeing an unprecedented unity amongst at least, well, 3 of the 4 main political parties here. Many people here see it as a positive. There are, of course, questions about whether or not the opposition will be able to act as an effective opposition against the government in the wake of the coup. The other thing that critics of the government say is that the third largest party in parliament, the Kurdish People's Democratic Party, was not invited to the rally because it's accused of being too close to Kurdish militants who are fighting the government in the southeast. So the unity here is not total, but it is important to emphasize this is something that is kind of unprecedented in recent times in Turkey, the idea that several rival leaders would come together for the same event like this.
Now, Erdogan's pushing to reinstate the death penalty. This isn't new, but why is there such a hype over this, and what purpose is it serving?
I think that it's genuinely wanted by a lot of people here. I don't know the exact figures. I haven't seen surveys. But, certainly in the days after the coup attempt, I met plenty of people who want the reinstatement of the death penalty. The question is whether or not Turkey will go through with it. President Erdogan is suggesting that he will. That move, Europe has made clear, would put a halt, an end to Turkey's hopes of joining the European Union and would really increase tensions in that relationship. There's also obviously the question about whether or not those who were sentenced to death would have faced a fair trial. Human rights groups fear that the coup attempt will be used to go after those who maybe don't have a proven involvement in the coup attempt, or other critics who had nothing to do with it. But the government insists that the rule of law will be upheld here.
And Laura, who do the people hope to bring to justice with this new or newly reinstated, if so, death penalty?
Well, the people that Turkey is squarely blaming for the coup attempt are Fethullah Gülen, an exiled Islamic cleric who used to be a close ally of President Erdogan, but is now his staunchest foe. He denies any involvement in the coup attempt, but the government here is insistent that him and his followers were behind it. We do know that the ruling party, the Justice and Development Party, did work very closely with the Gülen movement for many years here until they fell out very badly in 2013. And Turkish analysts, journalists, experts say that it is true that Gülen supporters had infiltrated the civil service and the military and the judiciary. The question is whether there is hard proof that they were behind this coup attempt.
And the unprecedented show of support, do you think the crackdown is nearing an end?
I think it's hard to say. I think we know that the Turkish government officials said over the weekend that they believe that as many as 150,000 people may have been involved in actively supporting and financing this movement. That figure comes from the number of users that they believe were actively engaged in this secret messaging app that supporters of the Gülen movement were allegedly using. We'll have to wait and see what evidence there is that those people were involved directly or indirectly in supporting a coup. But, my suspicion is that there is a lot still to come. I mean, this is a coup attempt that really came quite close to assassinating the president and overthrowing the government. There were tanks in the street. There were obviously some quite serious people behind it. We're just not quite sure who exactly that was yet.
Laura Patel, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon, our journalist in Istanbul. Intentions to resign. And day 2 of Rio, a new swimming record is made as Phelps wins his 19th Olympic gold medal. And a surprise in tennis as the #1 seed goes home in the first round. Welcome to the Daily Beat. We're going to start with the latest from Israel and the West Bank. Israel's government no longer opposes cutting off power to Palestinian cities in the West Bank over a large debt, a reversal of its previous stance. Responding to a Palestinian High Court of Justice petition against the practice, Israel noted that while it has the authority to instruct its electric corporation to continue supplying Palestinian cities, it will no longer do so. And in studio is Shai Ben-Ari, our senior defense correspondent. Shai, why is Israel reversing its stance?
Well, really, this is a situation where you have a very large debt, around $500 million, owed by the Palestinian Authority to the Israeli electric company, which basically has always given that specific infrastructure to the territories controlled by the authority. This is an exercise of pressure, you could say. This debt has been long-standing. The government now apparently no longer opposes the cutting off of power to the PA as a measure of pressure. The report also states that the government has already told the High Court it will no longer instruct the electric company to provide electricity. Back in May and April, there were cases of blackouts in Bethlehem and Jericho when the electric company actually cut down a measure of the power as a form of exercising pressure. The court then put it in.
Good afternoon. It's Monday, August 8th, and you're watching The Daily Beat here on i24 News. I'm Michal Divon. Let's get to today's headlines. The Israeli government sets up a task force to deport activists it deems are working against the state of Israel. Japan's Emperor Akihito makes a rare address hinting at